Senator Dorgan has spoke out on the secrecy of the Federal Reserve System. There is no entity in the world that controls our lives more than the Federal Reserve System. What the Federal Reserve Board does, nobody knows what they're doing.
We have a privately owned central bank system disguised as a government-owned system.
There is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take. There is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take.
$500 billion and you don't know who got the money?
The loans go to the central banks.
Who actually made that decision to hand out $1 trillion that way? $500 billion. Who made that decision?
The Federal Open Market Committee.
All right. Well, the Constitution says no money shall be drawn from the Treasury but in consequence of appropriations made by law.
This money is not drawn from the Treasury.
Is it safe to say that nobody in 1913 contemplated that your small little group of people would decide to hand out $500 billion to foreigners?
This particular authority has been used numerous times over the years.
The authority that Mr. Bernanke is referring to is the Federal Reserve Act of 1913.
Congressman Charles Lindbergh said the following: "This act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the President signs this bill, the invisible government by the monetary power will be legalized. The people may not know it immediately, but the day of reckoning is only a few years removed. The worst legislative crime of the ages is perpetrated by this banking bill."
After signing the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, President Woodrow Wilson said, "I have unwittingly ruined my country." I'd like to sing you a song, and if you know the words, please sing along with me. 16 trillion, and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. Taxes and interest from shore to shore. The Federal Reserve owns the company store. Thank you. It really is true, folks. If we don't understand that and we don't address that issue, all other issues become impossible to solve. We need help. And where are we going to get that help besides ourselves? This is a tough problem. Well, the Constitution contains the answers to all issues if we study the document. The Declaration of Independence gives us clues and answers as well. The signers of the Declaration, all of them, said that they could not have established this, the greatest country in 5,000 years, without the help of God, without the help of the divine hand of providence. And I say to my friends that don't believe in God, it's irrelevant. Whether you believe in God or not does not change the truth, the fact that believing in Him works. Now, how do we interpret the Constitution? Thank you. There are 4 references to God in the Declaration of Independence, and there are 2 references to God in the Constitution. So how do we interpret the Constitution? The Declaration of Independence tells us how to do that. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that we have unalienable rights from our Creator. For 4.5 months, the signers of the Constitution deliberated and debated and fought over every word within the document and its connected definitions. And they still all signed on to Article 7. Article 7 tells us who the God of the Declaration of Independence is, and who the God of the Constitution is, and who the God of this country is. Those 2 words are there in Article 7 telling us who it is. Our Lord. The 9th Amendment is the voice of God, in my opinion, telling us how to interpret the document. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. No construing the document in favor of federal government at the expense of the unalienable rights of the people. That is the voice of God. Now, what are we doing here today? Are we here to vote for our most favorite person to become a senator or a governor or a congressman? Or are we here to support the defenders of the Constitution. We all have an obligation to defend our liberties. The Constitution is the most valuable tool, the most valuable weapon in defending our liberties. If we open up the document and we read the 9th Amendment, then we can understand Amendment 5. Amendment 13, involuntary servitude is against the law in every state. Amendment 5, you can't have your property taken from you, we're not just talking real estate, and have it redistributed at your expense. We need people in Washington reminding our representatives that they have a contract. It is against the law to be liberal. It is called the oath of office. It is called the obligation, the implied oath to the Constitution of the United States. It is called thou shalt not steal. God bless you all. Thank you for all you do.
A couple of years ago, I felt compelled to read the Constitution. Actually, I felt guilty for not reading it. I thought I'd better read this document, and I started reading it, got to Article 1, Article 2, and then Section 1 last paragraph, and it changed my life. My head spun. I knew the President had taken an oath, but to actually see it in print, where he swore to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, I thought, wow, I just saw President Obama say the Constitution is fundamentally flawed. Senator Bennett says, well, there's so many different interpretations of the Constitution. But I thought, wait a minute, how can we interpret the Constitution? Many different interpretations. There's an answer to that. Is it original intent? And I have discovered it's not original intent. Alexander Hamilton was opposed to Thomas Jefferson. Now, you may know what one of the clauses in the Constitution that Thomas Jefferson hated. He said it will destroy our country. And he's right. He was very upset with the borrowing clause in Article 1, Section 8. The borrowing clause. Well, Alexander Hamilton was excited about that clause because he represented the bankers who wanted to own the money like they do now and create it, and with it being their property, and then loan it to us. And Alexander Hamilton said a national debt is a national blessing. Think about it. If you have a money tree in your backyard and it's legitimate, I mean it's growing money, does it create debt for you or assets? Does it create assets for you or debt? Exactly. Well, Article 1, Section 8 gave the power to Congress to create money. Alexander Hamilton said a national debt is a national blessing. I guess he was afraid that if Congress really had the control of money and could create it, that they'd spend like crazy because there would be no need for taxing. And so he thought, well, we've got to control it and own it and give them a debt, and then they won't spend out of control. How can we interpret the Constitution? It's not original intent because we don't want Alexander's original intent. Jefferson's was pretty good, I thought. And it's not in favor of the federal government at the expense of the unalienable rights, but it's God's intent. But we need to go back to God's intent. To me, the 9th Amendment is the voice of God. The 9th Amendment. The enumeration of the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage the other rights retained by the people. Well, what are the rights retained by the people? Well, what does that mean? What are the rights retained by the people? Well, what are the rights retained by the people? We know it's a self-evident truth that we have unalienable rights from our Creator. If it's unalienable, then Congress can't take them away, can they? So Congress doesn't have the power. The Supreme Court justices don't have the power. Judges don't have the power. Police forces don't have the power to change that, to take away those rights. They can only disparage or deny them or violate them. Trump, checkmate. No construing. And what makes that Trump and checkmate is we go to the second clause in the Declaration of Independence, self-evident truths that we have unalienable rights from our Creator. So Jefferson was right because the 10th is similar to the 9th, and I believe, like I said, that the 9th Amendment purifies the document. Why is it important to study the Constitution? I believe so we can go to the 9th and go to the Declaration of Independence and say, hey, we just trumped your construing. And that's why it's so important for us as citizens to understand the document so we can defend it, because it is defensible. It is beautiful. So as I've studied the Constitution, I think, wait a second. Am I obligated to this document? I know our representatives are, and I know all federal and state employees are. President Obama is. But am I? And it's like, I am. It's called I call it the implied oath. Now, we as citizens have an obligation. We have an implied oath. All of our representatives in Washington, D.C. have sworn or affirmed to protect, defend, support the Constitution. Defend. Who is the biggest enemy to the Constitution? So I'm thinking, okay, what's the biggest enemy? And it connects to what Jefferson was saying and what his fight was. Now, you may know what one of the clauses in the Constitution that Thomas Jefferson hated. He said it will destroy our country. And he's right. He was very upset with the borrowing clause in Article 1, Section 8. The borrowing clause. Jefferson was vehemently against that borrowing clause. Well, Hamilton said a national debt is a national blessing. How in the heck could anyone say that? But I think I understand why. He was wrong, but he felt like we couldn't handle the power to create money, which would eliminate the national debt. Who is the biggest enemy to the Constitution? It's the Federal Reserve shareholders, the people behind the curtain. Why is the Federal Reserve such a big enemy? He said it will destroy our country. And he's right. Bernanke is doing everything he can to say the economy will crash. Why? Is that a threat? To protect oversight? When they create $1 trillion, it is their property. It's not supposed to be their property. Thou shalt not steal. So the question arises, how much has the Federal Reserve shareholders been acquiring in assets since 1913? Abraham Lincoln was vehemently opposed to a central bank owning, a private group of people owning and controlling and loaning us our own money. Andrew Jackson, he called them vipers. There was another person, too, that was against a central bank owned by private people. His name was Thomas Jefferson. He was very upset with the borrowing clause in Article 1, Section 8. Think about it. Most people in America believe that our government, our federal government, is creating money out of thin air and then doing whatever they want with it. Well, wait a second. If they were doing that, why would they need to tax anyone? Why would they need to borrow it from anyone? Well, when money is created out of thin air, the people who create it and are allowed to own it and loan it are the ones that we borrow from. It's a simple problem. And with enough public awareness, we can understand what Ron Paul is saying. Hey, 1.6 trillion of the national debt is fictitious because a private entity should not be allowed to create money out of thin air and then loan it to a government that has to pay it back. I was watching a congressional hearing. Bernanke was asked, hey, you don't have congressional authority to give trillions of dollars to foreign banks and to places we have no concept of where it's going. Article 1, Section 8 does not give you the authority. It says all money from the Treasury has to be legislated. You can't do that without permission from the Congress. And Ben Bernanke, you know what he said? Maybe you saw it. It's on YouTube. You can see it. It's not coming from the Treasury. Congressman Paul is saying 1.6 trillion of the debt is fictitious because it's borrowed from the Federal Reserve and they create it from nothing to borrow it. Well, they've been loaning money to China too. Why are they loaning money to China? I thought China had so much money they were loaning it to us. Well, Article 3, Section 3 defines that as treason. Aid and comfort to enemies of the United States or unknown places where they can get it. Most of America believes that when they create $1 trillion, the government owns it. But you know what? America believes that if money is created, it creates debt. Created money doesn't create debt, except to the one that's borrowing it. But what does it do for the person that created it? It creates assets. So the assets of the Federal Reserve, if we have a real audit of the Federal Reserve, it's going to blow our minds and we're going to get so mad. And that's why Bernanke is doing everything he can to say and to protect that from happening, keep that from happening, and that's why he threatens us. It sounds like a promise, but he says, oversight, the economy will crash. Why? Is that a threat? Sounds like a threat to me. You look at the history of the central banks and Federal Reserve, that's what they say. When people start to find out what they're doing and they start to stop their actions, that's what they say. Hey, you end us, we'll end you. Well, if I were a criminal, Federal Reserve banker, Federal Reserve shareholder, there's a difference, well, we better buy some protection because when the people find out, they're going to be mad. Martin Luther, when he had the Bible published, what happened? All hell broke loose. People saw the truth. So what do? They buy protection. Publishing companies, media, newspapers, congressmen, senators. And they have been buying for 99 years. 99 years! Andrew Jackson stopped him for 74, 75. Andrew Jackson called the central banksters vipers. But no one, I don't think, people don't understand it. They think it's, interest and inflation. Oh, they're creating all this unbacked money and it's causing inflation. BS. The company store is fluctuating the prices. 16 trillion, and what do you get? Another day older and a deeper in debt. Well, I say, interest and taxes from shore to shore. The Federal Reserve is the company store. With God's help, just a small percentage of this American public, we can change it. The signers of the Declaration of Independence, it was a successful thing that they did. And it was because God helped them. That's what they said. And I say to people, I say to my friends, I say, hey, it doesn't matter whether you believe in God or not. That's irrelevant. The point is, the greatest country in 5,000 years was developed and founded on a belief in God. As you know, there are 4 references to God in the Declaration of Independence. And the question arises, well, who is this God? For 4.5 months, the founders, the signers of the Constitution, deliberated and scrutinized every word with its definition. And they all signed on to the Constitution, including Article 7. Well, Article 7 tells us who the God of the Declaration of Independence is. Our Lord. Those 2 words are in Article 7. Well, historically, if you break the oath of office or break the oath, you invoke negative. You invoke the vengeance of God upon you. You invoke a negative life. But if you promote it and defend it and uphold it, you promote just the opposite. And I swear, my life is so much better because I talk about the Constitution, what I've learned in it, and I promote it and I defend it. My name is LOY BRUNSON. 16 trillion, and what do you get? Another day older and a deeper in debt. Taxes and interest from shore to shore. The Federal Reserve is the company store. It really is, folks. It really is. Since 1913 and even before, they've been able to create money, but especially since 1913, they have had the power to create unlimited amounts of money, not just to loan to governments and to do credit swaps with 14 other central banks, but they have been able to spend. Now, a real audit will expose, hopefully, the spending as well as the loaning. $1 trillion created by the Federal Reserve has to be owned by someone before it can be loaned. Who owns that trillion? Someone has to own it. Well, if you borrow something from someone, you obviously don't own it. And the person you borrow from is the person that owns it. So who owns the trillions that are being created out of thin air before it's loaned to Congress and loaned to other banks? If we look at the history of the Federal Reserve 1913, the Federal Reserve shareholders owned the system. They owned it. And in theory, until the 70s, they were simply loaning gold and silver that they had on deposit. So they were, in theory, nonprofit, and they had the nonprofit status. But when Nixon and the Congress allowed them to go off the gold and silver standard in the 70s, all Federal Reserve note dollars in existence that had not been redeemed by the Federal Reserve became pure 100% profit. Now, someone is going to expose this in a big global way, and I believe if they don't win a peace prize, they will deserve a Nobel Peace Prize, because this means a windfall and a reduction in our debt like nothing else. We're talking trillions of dollars created and owned by its creators, which are the shareholders of the Federal Reserve. Now, everyone in Washington, D.C. that's a representative, as you know, have either sworn or affirmed an oath to the Constitution. And it isn't necessarily to support the Constitution, but it includes defending the Constitution. In order to defend against enemies, you've got to be able to identify an enemy. We had 2 Black Hawk helicopters that crashed and killed 27 people from enemy fire because the pilots of the aircraft couldn't properly identify an enemy. We've got to understand the enemy. The Federal Reserve shareholders have been buying protection for about 100 years now. They can buy anything they want. Global entities, newspapers, media, global companies. And they truly have become the company store. There's a great video out there. It's the #1 most watched documentary on the internet. It's called Money Masters. And you can go to brunsonforsenate.com and you can see more information about this. Thank you very much for your time. God bless. My name is LOY BRUNSON, and I'm running for U.S. Senate here in Utah, this 2012 race. I called the Lieutenant Governor's office, and I says, hey, you tell people to go out and vote. Go out and vote. How about for the Communist Party? And I says, how about going out, encouraging people to study the Constitution and go out and vote accordingly? And if we don't understand the basic tenets of this, forget it. Go home. Get out of politics. How many representatives have sworn or affirmed or uphold the Constitution and they have no idea what is in it? That's perjury. And say, hey, what say you, Senator so-and-so, about the 5th Amendment and this part of it, or the 13th Amendment, or Article 3, Section 3? When was the last time a representative says, hey, I support this bill or I authored this bill because of this clause in this section? Doesn't happen. Doesn't happen. Yet that's supposed to be why we have such a great country, is because of this document. So what are we going to do? Run back to Washington? Hey, I've got something better than this. What, are we smarter than Jefferson? We're going to go back there and we have our own ideas, we have our own plans, we have our own ways that we're going to fix this problem? I'm obligated, and every other senator is obligated, to vote according to the Constitution. There's no compromise. When you swear that you're going to do that, you better do it. You can't get up there and go, well, I better compromise here, I better compromise there. Or you better stay home and not do it. Our representatives are supposed to be defending the Constitution. And then I'm thinking, do we as citizens have an oath? Do we have an implied oath? Do we have an obligation to the Constitution to support it and defend it and protect it?
Well, the President's oath is a little different than the Congressional oath. I guess support, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. But I think all of us as citizens, would you say all of us as citizens have the same implied oath to defend the Constitution?
We should. We should all be working toward the same things, right? We're all operating under the same Constitution.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that we have unalienable rights given to us by our Creator. There was no debate back then. Is there a God? Isn't there a God? Should we have a God in government? Shouldn't we? Hey, it's a self-evident truth. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the 9th Amendment, to me, is the spirit and the soul and the purifier of the Constitution. It's one sentence long. It says, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. In other words, no Supreme Court justice, no power on earth can interpret the Constitution in a way to deprive you or disparage you or to take away your unalienable rights. And that's what unalienable means, right? They can't be taken from you. So apparently our Lord wants us to be free. We'd better get on our knees and pray and rely upon the same divine hand of providence that the signers of the Declaration relied upon. The God mentioned in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution is not only merciful, but He is generous. And I promise you that as you study this and start defending it, He will bless your life. I know that's true. I swear that's true.